Well, Marriott International is certainly growing all over the world, particularly where we are in Asia, which is today. And I'm catching up with Tony Capuano, the President and CEO. And Tony, we're in Singapore, but Asia Pacific for you is such an important region in the world.
It sure is. I mean, this is one of the fastest growing regions for us in the world. The pace of recovery coming out of the pandemic has been stunning for us. You may have heard on the second quarter earnings call, we talked about some of the disparity in pace of recovery in different regions around the world. You look at the US, which is our biggest market, that's a market that's sort of settling into a more normalized or stabilized environment. We saw 6% RevPAR growth in the US, which is a more typical pace of growth. But in the international regions, we saw 39% RevPAR growth. We saw really strong growth in China, which was one of the last markets to reopen. But across what we call APEC, Asia Pacific excluding China, we saw really strong RevPAR growth almost across every market.
And where we are in particular in Southeast Asia, it's a hot market for you. Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, you've signed another few properties, and then obviously greater out into Australia and New Zealand. Obviously, but particularly Southeast Asia is just so key for you at the moment.
It sure is. I started the week in Indonesia. As you point out, I was in Jakarta and we signed 3 new deals in Indonesia's new capital. Stopped by Bali, saw a couple great projects there. So you're right, I mean, all across the South markets, we're seeing really strong demand for our brands.
And it's interesting because if you look at sort of your career and not many CEOs have come from a development background, which is kind of really exciting because you know all the owners, you know the deals. Right. So you've been watching APAC for some time in your previous role as well, and just watching the numbers climb up to 1,000 very quickly.
Well, and what's really gratifying for me, you might recall there was a period in history where everybody was quite excited about the BRIC countries, right? And you saw many of the big global brand companies really make huge bets on China and India. And most certainly, we invested significant resources to make sure we were positioned to grow rapidly in those 2 critical markets. But we didn't do that to the exclusion of other really dynamic markets. And the investments we made in those markets in terms of putting local resources on the ground are really paying dividends. When you look at what we've seen in Thailand, in Indonesia, in Australia and New Zealand, and we're really getting the benefit of those investments now.
And if you look at sort of your career with the company as well, obviously adding Starwood, which had a very strong Asia footprint, obviously really picked that up for you, but in its own right, Marriott and Ritz-Carlton were both obviously getting great traction in those 2 businesses as well.
No question, although I think one of the most important strategic decisions we made, I made this decision on the development side in my old role, but Raj Menon, who runs our APEC business, made the same decision on the operating side, was local matters. Right, I have always fundamentally believed our business, whether it's on the operating side or the growth side, it is a local business. And the more you can do to populate your teams with in-market resources that grew up, they know the players, they know the business practices, they know the government officials, they know the supply and demand landscape, it really positions you well. I took over global development for the company in 2009. And when I looked across the landscape of our resources, it was like many of the big global brand companies. We probably had 50 or 60% of our transactors were expats. And I just fundamentally believed that real estate was a local business. Today, more than 90% of those transactors are working in their home regions. And similarly, when we were in Jakarta earlier this week, we talked about the fact that our Indonesian operating team is based in Indonesia. And on its surface, that seems like a simple and logical approach, but it's not necessarily a common approach, and I think it's been a huge competitive advantage for us.
Yeah, and I think it's looking at sort of what you've been doing on both ends of the spectrum. Obviously, the first JW into New Zealand, the first Moxie into Sydney, into Australia, and both of those brands have had wonderful traction, particularly in Asia, and particularly Moxie. We're seeing a lot of Moxie movement now, and you've obviously got some coming to New Zealand as well, so that's an exciting brand.
It is. I mean, one of the things that's exciting to me, when you look at the lifestyle's maybe a bit of an overused descriptor, but when you look across our brand architecture, the ability to offer both our owner community and our guests such a broad range of lifestyle-focused brands at multiple price points across multiple quality tiers, from Edition at the luxury tier down to Moxie, I think is really a compelling set of offerings. And as you point out, Moxie has really captured the imagination of a certain demographic of guests, and as a result, a certain profile of development partner.
It's been quite a growth for that, hasn't it? If you look at sort of Times Square in New York and seeing what the brand has done, it really took off. And this was one of the brands, obviously, you worked on as a Marriott brand before. I'm trying to think, this is before the Starwood acquisition, because Moxie was around for a while. So
that's right.
You launch a brand into the market, so you must be happy to see how far it's come.
Yeah, it's exciting. And one of the things I hope it validates, there are different approaches among the big global brand companies. There are some that are keenly focused on growing their brand platform through M&A. There are others that are keenly focused, almost singularly focused on organic growth of new offerings. And we've had a very blended approach. And so I am delighted all the way back to the acquisition of powerhouse brands like Residence Inn and Ritz-Carlton, which were acquired through M&A transactions, but equally gratified to see some of the organic launches we've done, like Autograph Collection and Moxie. And so I think that's a strategy that has served us well and will likely guide our growth going forward.
And you don't have any trains yet or aeroplanes. You've got a boat sailing now for Ritz-Carlton. So you're not a bricks and mortar company anymore. Now, are you looking at a more holistic approach on what you do as a travel company?
Yeah, well, listen, I think we are really focused on the customer. Often there are folks in our company that talk about Bonvoy as our most important brand because it's a unifying brand. It's the platform that allows us to expose our guests to the full breadth of our travel offerings. And as you point out, clearly our most important business is our core lodging business. But we've expanded that business. We are the largest of the branded companies with a branded residential, for sale residential offering. We have our homes and villas platform. We have a travel insurance platform. The first Ritz-Carlton yacht is sailing, and ships 2 and 3 are under construction. And so in some ways, the strategy is relatively simple and straightforward. I want to capture as much of your travel wallet as possible. How do I accomplish that objective? I have the right product everywhere you want to travel. So if you want to go to sea, I don't want to give you reason to go outside the Bonvoy ecosystem. If you're planning a multi-generational vacation and a multi-bedroom luxury home serves your needs for that very narrow specific trip purpose, by virtue of the launch of Marriott Homes and Villas, again, I've created a circumstance where you don't need to look outside our ecosystem. And so to your specific question, I do think where it makes sense, we'll continue to look for opportunities to add adjacencies that achieve that broad objective, which is making sure those 186 million Bonvoy members can find everything they need to satisfy their travel needs within our portfolio.
And it's interesting when you look at sort of Bonvoy and the growth of Bonvoy and the launch of Bonvoy, you pulled 3 programs together that were very strong. Right. Happened to launch the same week as another loyalty program came out as well. But the growth of Bonvoy has just been phenomenal the last 4 years. I mean, 3.5, 4 years almost now. It's time's coming onto us. Just to see that is just amazing.
Yeah, it's really gratifying. I mean, what it tells us is we're far from perfect, to be sure, but it I think illustrates for us that we're making a lot of smart decisions. And those decisions, I think, are born out of the fact that we're listening to our guests. We're making sure we have the right offerings. We're being thoughtful about how we structure the program. We're trying to be sensitive to the fact that, as you point out, we pulled together programs that had very passionate members. And so trying to harmonize those programs is a challenging exercise. By definition, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to make everyone happy, but you try to really be guided by what you're hearing from those customers.
So your elites are obviously pretty happy. There was an airline this week that came out and ripped up its loyalty program and changed it dramatically, and a lot of the elites aren't too happy about that. But you did listen a lot to them when you did pull those programs together, because Starwood had some of the most loyal travelers we've ever seen.
Well, and I also think, to that point, One of the things that's critical, one of the company's core values for 96 years has been this notion of embracing change. And when I think about the definition of embracing change, it's not only risk-taking, but it's also the willingness to sort of pivot on the fly. And a good example of that, as we evolved the ambassador program, which was a signature component of SPG. The SPG members who were ambassadors loved that program. We kept that program, but we made some modifications. One of the modifications we made was, at one point, we eliminated the dedicated ambassadors, where you knew that John Smith was your dedicated ambassador. We heard loud and clear from the ambassadors, we hate that change. We had deep personal relationships with our ambassador, and in fact, it's sort of interesting. Even when we made that change, most of the ambassadors stayed connected to their ambassadors, whether they were officially their ambassadors or not. So we've reinstituted the one-on-one personal ambassadors, and I think we've got to be willing to be guided by the wants and needs of our members.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting looking at the company and what you've obviously taken over. You had some incredible leaders before you, not an easy role to step into. But you've got some great teams. I mean, look at how long people like Raj have been with the company for. The loyalty from these Marriott execs, it goes back 20, 30, 40 years with a lot of your staff. I mean, how does that feel as a CEO to be in that role and have so much loyalty within your own staff in the company?
Yeah, it's interesting. As you point out, I was fortunate enough to get this job, but under terribly difficult circumstances. The combination of the loss of my dear friend and mentor and a really remarkable leader in Arnie, and also in the middle of what Bill Marriott has characterized as the most significant challenge the company's ever faced. And when I got questions about that, often those questions were sort of phrased, how do you fill these enormous shoes? And often my response really goes to the point you made, which was, had I had to face those challenges by myself, it would have been terrifying. But I was able to face those challenges with hundreds of thousands of experienced, deeply passionate Marriott associates and a long tenured, battle-tested leadership team who've been around for decades and have fought their way through recessions, global conflicts, the impact of 9/11, the Great Recession. And so there's not a better team in the industry or a team that I felt was better equipped to help me navigate the challenges that were created by the pandemic.
And within the company, obviously, you've got a lot of passions and a lot of programs that you take a lot of interest in. Obviously, a few of those key ones are human trafficking and diversity. And obviously, they're two things that you're both passionate about yourself in terms of seeing how Marriott can make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, another of the core values is this idea of serving our world, and ESG is an acronym that now seems to dominate corporate boardrooms around the world. Before somebody coined that phrase, Marriott was doing that every day for 96 years through this notion of serving our world. I think you're exactly right on human trafficking. I often say so many wonderful things happen every day in hotels. Sadly, human trafficking is a horrible thing that sometimes happens in hotels. And as a result, those of us that are leaders in the travel and tourism industry, I think have both an opportunity and a responsibility to do everything we can to combat trafficking. We're very proud of the training programs that we've developed. Over 1 million Marriott associates have been trained. We have some amazing stories of Marriott associates that have used that training and actually saved prospective victims of trafficking. I'm equally proud when we saw the impact of that training, we said, this isn't a competitive issue, this is a human issue. So we've made that training available to all of our competitors. And so as proud as I am of 1 million Marriott associates being trained, I'm just as proud that 1 million competitor associates have been trained. And those are the sorts of issues that our industry should take on more broadly. And on your diversity issue, or your diversity comment, our company is about creating opportunity for all. I think it's critically important that our workforce and certainly our leadership should look like the guests that we serve. And we've set some ambitious goals. I think we're making terrific progress against those goals. And my encouragement to our teams is never be satisfied. right? This is an effort that will require deliberate and consistent focus to make sure that we're a leader among our peers.
Thank you so much.
All right, my pleasure. Good to
Thank you.
see you.
You too.
Thank you.